I mentioned previously that the plan was to get this car on the road over the 4th of July holiday when my dad and brother were in town, and we did that, but just barely. In the last video, I installed the differential and basically had a complete drivetrain. Since then, I modified the existing header to wrap around the side of the engine. I did that by cutting the header into straight sections and curved sections, and I used those sections to redirect the exhaust pipe. It turns out this header is titanium, not stainless steel. By the way, this is what it looks like when you try to weld titanium with a stainless steel rod. Considering this was my first time building the header and my first time welding titanium, I'm pretty happy with how this came out. Next, I moved on to the brakes. I installed the stock Miata brakes that came with all the Miata suspension parts that I bought. I welded this tab to the body to hold the other end of the soft line, and then I made new hard lines. This is actually a lot easier to do than you would think. Just buy some of this flexible hard line. I'll put links in the description for all the stuff I use. And buy this double flaring tool. Be sure to install the nut with the correct thread pattern for your application. To get a good flare on the end, prep is the key. Once you've cut the hard line to length, you need to put it in the tool and file the edge down so it's nice and flat. Then you need to deburr the middle of the hard line. I use something sharp. You can use a razor blade. Once you've done that, you need to go over the outside edge with a file to also clear off any burrs on that edge and give you a nice smooth surface. Then we flip the tool over right side up and we get ready to do the first of the two flares. I like to dip the hard line in a little bit of brake fluid to give it lubrication. Now mount the hard line in the tool, but don't tighten it down yet. You're going to use the die. The kit comes with several size dies for different size brake lines. This is the right die for this brake line, and we're going to use that bottom edge of this die to set the height of the brake line. Once that's done, we're ready to tighten it down. You want it nice and tight so the brake line doesn't slip out. Now we flip the die over, set it onto the hard line. We line this up, make sure everything is nice and straight. And we tighten it down. Okay, so now the brake line has a single flare on it. In order to do a double flare, we put this tool back on the hard line and tighten it down again. And there you have it. You have a custom brake line. I like to blow them out with brake cleaner and compressed air just to make sure there's nothing inside the line. But that's pretty much it. You're ready to install it on the car. I'm using the Mazda Miata master cylinder, and I also installed a proportioning valve between the master cylinder and the rear brakes. About that time, my dad and brother showed up, and when they got here, we did a lot. I mean, a whole lot. We all really wanted to see this car at least drive around the block before they left, so we spent several 12 to 14 hour days working on this car. The engine and subframe were put back in the car, the seats were installed, the fuel tank was installed, the original motorcycle fuel pump was installed using an adapter plate on the bottom of the fuel cell. Hey Walter, what's up buddy? Walter had a minor surgery recently, so unfortunately he's wearing the cone. Coolant hoses were ran from the engine to the radiator, and the overflow tank from the motorcycle was installed. We made a custom throttle cable and clutch cable. This was also easier to do than you would think. I just bought 2 DIY cable kits. One was a little bit smaller, which I used for the throttle cable, and one was a thicker gauge cable, which I used for the clutch cable. Basically, you just cut everything to length, and then you solder an end onto it. The kits come with lots of different fittings for different applications. I used regular wire cutters to cut the cable to length. Then I install the fitting that I want. Then you need to fray out the edge of the wire. This is very important. Once the end of this cable is covered in solder, it will be impossible for this frayed edge to go back to being compressed and smooth, so the fitting will never be able to come off. Then you need to use a solder pot to heat the solder. You want to be able to dip the cable into the solder. It's important not to try to heat the end of the cable with a torch and solder it that way. You'll overheat the cable, which will almost certainly cause it to fail. Then you dip the end of the cable in some flux and dip it into the solder. The smoke is just from the flux burning off, that's totally normal. Now I just wipe it off with a rag and let it cool. You can always clean up the solder a little bit with a file if needed, but there you go. You have a custom cable ready to be installed on the car. Next up, we connected the shifter handle in the car to the shifter rod of the motorcycle with this adapter. And then it was time to see if the engine still runs. Many hours later, we thought we were finally ready to go for our first test drive. Unfortunately, the clutch didn't seem to work. When I bought the motorcycle, I was told that the clutch slipped, but the bike came with a kit to replace the clutch plates. So I did that, and apparently when I put the clutch plates in, I put a few of them into the wrong slot, and the whole thing didn't compress the way that it was supposed to. So unfortunately, the clutch would never disengage. You couldn't get it to work. Luckily, we were able to get the engine cover off of the engine and access the clutch without pulling the motor, and we were back on track. We were ready to go on our first test drive. After a few laps around the block, it was time to make the car a little more roadworthy. The wiring harness for the car was cleaned up. By the way, I recommend this cloth tape if you're going to be wrapping wires. I'll put a link in the description. LED light bulbs were installed because they're nice and bright, and also they won't use much energy, which is good because I'm just using this small motorcycle battery. New headlights were installed. I even filled in the holes from the old bumpers with small LED lights. Came out really nice. And then it was time for a proper test drive. We went to the place you always go to on your first test drive, the gas station. After a quick fill up, we were ready for more. Shortly after that, it was time for my dad and brother to leave. After they left, I made new dash panels and installed the instrument cluster from the motorcycle. I installed a second shift lever to operate reverse. I even installed a light on the dash to tell you when you're in reverse. How fancy is that? Now it's time to see what this thing can do. Wait, nope, not yet. First, we install this box in between the speed sensor from the engine and the speedometer so we can correct the speedometer. We don't want to get pulled over for speeding. Then we go for a test run to make sure the speedometer is accurate. The speed camera says 37 and the dash says 38. That's good enough for me. And now we don't have to worry about getting pulled over, which is good, because I've heard speeding tickets are really expensive.
$59 and $45. By signing in the red box, you are not admitting guilt. You're promising you're going to take care of the ticket, either by paying it or by fighting it in court.
Okay. And now it's time to finally go on a proper drive. I'm really pleased with how this car drives. So many things work really well on it. The brakes are awesome, the steering is really good, the sound of the engine is amazing, the low end torque is really good. I was concerned that it would struggle to get off the line, but it actually has lots of power. I can easily cruise around in the 4,000 to 6,000 RPM range, but the power really kicks in at the higher RPMs. There's still some things that I don't like so much about it, mainly just the suspension. It's way too stiff. I went back to the original motorcycle shocks up front and I've ordered softer springs, so hopefully that's going to fix the suspension issue. Also, it's still a little bit warm in the cabin. The header is directly behind your back, so you do feel that heat. I've added another layer of heat protection, but it's still kind of warm, so I need to do some work on the firewall. But other than that, this thing is amazing. This is definitely one of the coolest things I've ever built. I love it. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this build series. I really enjoyed building it, and I'm definitely going to enjoy driving it. I really love the way this project is coming out. There's definitely going to be more videos on this car, so stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's going to be a lot more content like this to come. Thanks, guys. Bye.